I think it's a good option. But that's just me. Let's go set fire to stuff and see what happens. Hey folks, welcome back. It is the big barn build. Today we're finally finishing all of our wall insulation install, and we're gonna answer some of the questions from the previous video on the insulation. Plus we might set fire to some things, look at some costs, and what are the U values we're looking at. So stick around and let's make a start. Now, if you will have seen our previous video, you'll know that we've already done all the insulation behind our green boards. Our green boards are our airtight layer, and that's what these blue patches are. So these were drilled, the lance, which is at the end of the hose, was put in, and everything was blown in really densely and fully filled all of these cavities. Remember, our walls are 300 millimeters thick, so there's a huge amount of material going in there, tons of the stuff. But this time it's a little bit different. We've got membrane to fit around the wall, and that's what's going to retain our insulation. So I'm going to show you now how we got on the day. I was helping James with the loading of the machinery whilst he was installing it in the room itself. Once we've done that, I'll be sharing with you a little bit on the costs, performance, some of the pros and cons, and also some of the U values that are involved in our wall makeup. Right, I'm busy loading in the trailer, getting this insulation blown in. James is in here. He's just about to move upstairs, because upstairs is where we're going to do the kind of second pass above the noggins. It's safer that way because there's no real access in here. But I'll show you how it's gone in. So all of this is now done, and although we didn't have the clear membrane to be able to demonstrate it being filled up, it's pretty easy to see how dense this is. There is no way there's any way that this can settle it, even right at the top. You can see it's bulging out, so much so that when we put the first two in, the batten started popping off. So we've actually gone back over with longer nails and nailed everything. So once this is counter batten, there's just about enough clearance to pull that back in. There were two awkward bits where we had to drop the lintel height down, and some really small bits at the top. So they're the sort of awkward bits to work around, and we'll make sure that's fully filled. But everywhere else, there's no doubt that these are blown in all the way to the top, because you can just see the bulge. So there's one skinny bit in the corner and another awkward bit over there, and then everything else, like I said, is going to be at the top. Alright, just put the last bag in. You can break the news to James. How close are we?
Got this and top of that one.
Oh, I just put 3 bales in, so we should make it, shouldn't we? Yeah. Well, plus what's in the bottom and the pipe, I guess. Good news is, I think we've got enough, literally to the bale, and I haven't seen any battens pop off or heard any battens pop off, So they've held. So James is up on that one there now. And then there's just that section there in the corner. So there we go, that is the last of our walls fully insulated. Nice and cozy, really quiet. It's got very quiet in here. Now there's some detailing to do around the roof to wall junction, and we'll be doing that in the future because right now we need to be concentrating on the brickwork and cladding outside. But there is an airtight and insulation detail to do at that perimeter junction. But apart from that, it's beginning to feel a lot more stable. The temperature's in here, and it really doesn't take much. On the couple of occasions we've just put the space heater on, really holds its heat. This garden room area on the left has triple glazing all the way around it and fully insulated walls and roof. And you can put the blower in there for 5 minutes and it's lovely for the whole day. So when we're using that for the kids or for anything really, that's a good little spot because it's quite nicely kind of concealed away from the rest of the build at the moment. Anyway, let's talk about some of the details because there were a lot of questions and concerns even in the previous video, and I wanted to answer them now. First up, what were our other options for insulating our walls? Bearing in mind we went for a timber frame construction. Well, of course, we could have gone down the kind of standard-ish route of a foam insulation such as Kingspan Celotex, which is a PIR board. Now, we use that under our slab because it's got good compressive strength and it makes sense to use it there. And it's done a fine job and it is what it is. There's less natural eco options for high-performance slab insulation, especially if you're restricted on height. But when it comes to the walls, we've got endless options because we can build our walls as thick as we want. We're not really worried about how thick they are. We can build them in timber to suit an insulation type. And in our case, we went with our I-joists, which are the OSB web I-joists. And that meant that we've got very little thermal bridging. It's almost like a twin stud wall. So we've got 300 millimeters, a foot of void to fill here. Our studs are at 600 millimeter spacings. So there's just these nice big coffin size holes that we need to fill. And there's various ways we could have gone about that. We could have put a solid board insulation in there, which is okay, would have performed well. But there are some disadvantages to poly ISO, the PIR boards and that type of insulation we'll talk about in a second. I could have put wool insulation. I could have put something like this. I could have put sheep's wool in there, or hemp, or one of the eco options. But this sort of bog standard Omni roll or whatever, it's okay. It needs to be in quite thick anyway, but this is probably not the best option to go in a wall like this. There are more suitable frame therm or timber frame insulations, but they're along these lines. So we could have done that. We would have needed 2 150 millimeter thickness. And of course, unless it's a really stiff batt insulation, there's a chance that that would sag a bit and not be as easy to detail. Also, because we've got an I-joist, we haven't got a solid board either side, a solid stud either side for it to fit into. So these are designed to go against solid studs. And I'll show you that now. Now we've got loads of this stuff, rolls and rolls of it, and it's pre-cut, pre-perforated rolls, and they're designed for either 400mm or 600mm spacings. So when we do come to install this in all our internal walls, and that's more for acoustic than anything, you can see that when we fit it in there, it's quite satisfying actually, I haven't done any of this yet. It is made exactly to suit our square timbers, and it's snug all the way, and that's going to do a great job at acoustic insulation within the building. We could have done that in an external wall, but because our studs are I-studs, they're actually, the distance is actually, I guess, 20, 30mm wider. So it might not have been such a snug fit. We might have ended up with more chance of things slipping down and not filling all the voids just because it's an I shape. So that might not have worked, but we could have made it work. Let's talk about costs though. Because if we're going to use a blown insulation, there's only really two options that we can consider. One is cellulose, which is what we use, which is a recycled paper insulation, newspaper mainly. Or we could use a wood fibre insulation, so a bit like a wood fibre board, but it's fluffy. And you can blow that in there. I didn't price that up, but that's another way to go. So they're the two things that we could have done, which would fill all irregular voids. We would have done all of our boarding and air tightness initially, like we did, and then it would have been blown in. Of course, if we'd gone this route, we would have done all of it ourselves. But you'll see now that that didn't really make too much difference. Now, when it comes to this type of insulation, I didn't actually get too many quotes for the product we would have probably looked at using, which would have been like Frame Therm, and I think there's a better one, 32. There's different grades giving you better U values. So if we'd gone for the better one, we would have had to go on for 150 millimeter slabs or rolls, double thickness, and we needed about 300 square meters of the stuff. If I just use some online quotes, and I did shop around, or I say shop around, I did have a look at a few different prices. By the time you buy the rolls pallet at a time, and we would need double quantity, so double thickness, it worked out around 36 to 40 pounds a square meter, and I'm sure I could probably hunt that down cheaper, but 36 to 40 pounds a square meter for double thickness Frame Therm to fill our 300 mil, even if that did not butt in tightly, but you know, if we were going to try and make it work, it was going to cost that. Now, the cost of insulating the whole building with cellulose worked out, I haven't had the final bill yet because we added on a little bit, but I think it worked out about £35 for a 300 mil densely blown insulation. So that works, I can't remember exactly how many tons we had delivered, possibly 8 pallets in the first time and another 3 or 4 afterwards, which is about 6 tons. Does that sound right? Probably is. So when we had that installed, it's installed in its highest density in walls. In a roof situation, it's a little bit fluffier, or for acoustic or internal intermediate floors, it's quite loose again. But when you're blowing it into an external wall, you are installing it at about 50 kilograms per cubic meter, or those bales that you saw me loading, 1.5 of those to a square meter of our wall, our 300 mil wall. So you do use a lot of the material, and it does go in very, very densely packed. You can see this. It's fine, and of course you wouldn't leave it like that, but there is less thermal mass to this. Now, one of the things that we haven't actually talked about much on the channel, mainly because I don't really understand it, is something called decrement delay. I think that's what it's called. And it's to do with how long it takes for heat to transfer through something. So you can have something that's very, very thermally resistant or efficient, which is what PIR, Kingspan or something might be, but it doesn't actually take that long for heat to get through it. That sounds confusing, but I think that is the case. Something like this might not be that great either, but when you've got something that's really densely blown in or densely packed, or something like wood fibre boards, the decrement delay is a lot longer. It takes a lot longer for heat to get through. So that is another big benefit of dense packed cellulose insulation like we've used. It gives you like thermal mass. We haven't got blocks or bricks or anything like that, but it's the next best thing because it's got some solidity to it. And I'll go and show you now what the pool's ended up like. It's pretty insane. Also, all these walls, we've been putting all our brick ties into the walls, and now they're full and you're hitting the studs with a hammer. It feels like you're hitting a solid wall. You know, it's really changed the feel of the timber frame. I haven't forgotten, I am going to set fire to things in a minute, or try. So this is what the pool's looking like now. It's pretty spaceship-like, and these walls are absolutely solid. I don't know who amongst you are rugby players, but all those late evenings, rugby training, this might remind you of something. It's basically like a tackle bag. It's the same sound as well, thumping one of them every night in the wet weather. Ignore the flappy tarpaulin. So there is no chance if you were to fill this with that wool insulation, it'd be a very different aesthetic because it wouldn't have bulged out, but also it would be a very different feel. Now, obviously, I've got to hope that I'm using strong enough counter battens so that when we fix our battens to the walls, hopefully not as thick as this, it will not distort and we end up with a wavy wall. But there is a chance of that because it is bulging a little bit. I think we're just about okay though. So that will go on and we'll deal with everything else in the future. But you can now see James has gone in there. This is a 2.3 metre section up to the first noggin. And his lance, which is that aluminium sort of spiked tube, can reach all the way to the top. So although he's only got one spot here, it's basically in the middle, he's reaching all the way up to the top corner. The pressure of the hose is set so that it's blowing in until it's so dense in there it can't blow out anymore. So he whacks it up into the corner, he's blowing it in, and as soon as it stops blowing, he moves down a bit. So he knows every single bit by feel and by experience. He knows that it's all full. So you're filling at the bottom first, up to a certain point, and then you spin the lance around, go to the top and work back down. And then you come out here. But everywhere is solid. You could shake this, rattle this, and it can't contract. It can't go anywhere. There's almost no chance, I don't think, of this sort of imaginary void happening at the top. I say imaginary. I bet there are situations where it happens. And from what it sounds like, and from what I've read, it's from installer error. And what used to happen, mainly in the States or other countries, you can go out to the DIY store and hire one of these hoppers and blow it in yourself, which might be one thing if you're blowing it into a loft and it's just a fluffy layer. It might not be, you could even do that by hand by just breaking out a bag. If you're doing it into a wall like this, I feel like if you didn't have the right training, the right gear, that's probably where it's not going in dense enough. The machine might not even be able to be man enough to get it in there dense enough. Then that's where, if you throw it in and it's all fluffy, I can imagine a settlement there. In this situation where there's so much material going in there, you know, this room took 4 pallets, I think. So over 2 tons of insulation, 2 tons of newspaper has been blown in here, and I don't think it can go anywhere, put it that way. Anyway, let's talk about the next set of questions, which is about the insulation itself and is any downsides. You would have seen in that video that we almost ran out. Fair play to James, he got it almost spot on quantities. But I did realise that we forgot to put these 2 bags. So there were 2 bags that was excess that had kind of fallen on the floor that were left here from the first install day. And James said, when you put your membrane up, once you put the first strip in, and James said, once you put the membrane up and put the first run of roll in, just chip these in, because it makes sense to use them. Anyway, this is what the insulation looks like. It simply is shredded. Well, it's probably not that simple. There's a lot of processes involved because it's not just shredded newspaper. It's been changed in its properties and really fluffed up. But it's not just newspaper. They put other stuff in here, natural stuff, and predominantly it's salts, I think, and boric acid or boron, or natural additives. And there's a fire part to that, and there's also a rodent part to that. Now, the salts, the natural salts that they put in this, make it a deterrent to rodents. Almost tempted to see if it's salty. Apparently, I mean, it does kind of dry your lips out when it was blowing around in here. Do I really? I don't really want to taste it. I wouldn't eat it if I were a rat, but maybe a little bit salty. Anyway, it's got stuff in it the rats don't like, and by all accounts, you can leave bales of this stuff on pallets, and they don't really go into the. We live on a farm. Rats get everywhere. We have rats in the Land Rover yesterday, in the bonnet insulation, making a winter bed in there. Whereas they don't really like this, apparently. So that's a good thing. Remember, we've got a brick wall with no access to that cavity. We've got a membrane. We've got smooth walls boarded. It's not like we're just relying on a breather membrane on the outside. So it shouldn't be an issue anyway. But that's the rodent part. It's got natural salts, and those natural salts also make it fire retardant. I think that's one of the elements, as is the boric acid. Maybe it's the boric acid. One or the other does one or the other. So there's a fire retardant part of it, and there's the rodent part of it. So they're the two main issues. And of course, if you're going to get water in your wall, a couple of people said as soon as that gets wet, it's going to slump and be worthless. Well, any insulation in your wall is going to do that. We could have used mineral wool, wood fibre, sheep's wool. There are certain insulations which perform a little bit better if they get damp, sheep's wool being one of them, because we love sheep and sheep's wool is awesome stuff. However, if you had all of that mineral wool, bats or glass wool or whatever it is, if that gets wet, I don't know if you've seen that before, it just turns into like a matted, soggy mess, gets heavy and it's going to go dropping and you're going to end up with colds. It's just the same thing is going to happen. The answer is don't get water in your wall. Do a really good install of your external weatherproofing. And in our case, there is almost no chance, touch wood, of weather ever getting to our membrane, let alone the board, let alone into the actual fabric of the building. We've got steel cladding with no joins from bottom to top, no horizontal joins. And on the outside, we've got board on board 1 inch, or it's going to end up with, 2 1-inch boards of timber. Then we've got a 100 mil thick brick wall and a big cavity with drainage. I don't think externally there's going to be issues. If you had a flood in the house or plumbing disasters, well, that's another thing. But hopefully I'm getting through all the questions and concerns in the last video. But there's one more. Let's do that now. Sorry, let's not. Let's finish my list here. U values. We haven't talked about U values in this build much, and I'm going to do a big video of the performance, the targeted performance of what this building is going to achieve. The first thing is the U value of the walls that we're doing. And if we're building with our 300 mil walls, our I-joists, which is almost thermally broken, all of this has all gone through PHPP software and Woofy, whatever that one is, and all these different softwares through our passive house consultant. But it comes in at 0.11. That's what you get for fulfilling a I-joist wall or an I-stud wall if you're using a board on the outside, board on the inside, and densely packed cellulose at whatever the prescribed density is, fulfill. And that's what we're achieving. So 0.11, which, although there's loads of elements to a passive house, and we're not necessarily aiming for anything in particular, that's on target for that sort of, for you to achieve that. But there are loads of other benefits to it, and also it's not down to just the U value. You've got to detail the airtightness, the junctions. You've got to make sure that you're not kind of introducing risks of condensation. There's so much more to it than just the amount. Anyone could just make their walls wider and deeper. But the best example I can give you is our cabin. We built it with 4-inch studs, literally CLS, nothing, they're not even 4-inch nowadays, are they? 89 millimeter studs, which we put sheep's wool in. So we've got the shed-like structure, and we put 40 millimeters of wood fibre board on the outside as our sheathing board before the cladding. So this wall's only 150 mil thick, and we've done an airtight construction. It's completely draft proof. It's really well detailed, and we don't heat that cabin. We have one wet towel radiator for one end for 4 bedrooms, and we've got a small electric radiator, column radiator in the lounge. So far this year, we've only ever used the towel radiator, apart from yesterday when we were processing honey and we had to warm up the room a little bit in the lounge. Apart from that, all the bedrooms, really, for maybe 50 weeks a year, need no heating. And that's nothing to do with the U value of the walls, because they probably don't even meet building regs or very, very average U values. But it's to do with how well detailed it is, and also the size and proportions of the building. So here, we're winning on both sides. We've got a very good, easy space to heat. It's a big square box. And we've got nice thick walls, which are detailed well with a really high air tightness. So all of that together should give us a really good performing wall system. So there are windows and doors in those walls, and you could have the best walls and the cheapest windows, and that's going to upset all your figures. Our windows are pretty high performing, I would say. I needed to try and kind of pick through and work out what the U values were exactly, because every window is different, depending on if it's just a fixed unit like that one over there, or if it's a door or sliding or whatever. But I think I'm right in saying they're 0.79. 0.6 is probably the glazing itself. So 0.79 is what we're getting on average on the windows and doors, which is way below building regs. Obviously they're triple glazed, airtight and Passive House approved, but that paired with this wall, you know, it doesn't get much better, and we're not spending, they're expensive glass, but we're not spending crazy amounts, and we're also using natural insulation. So I think it's a good option, but that's just me. Let's go set fire stuff and see what happens. Right, one issue I've got is that this is probably contaminated with sawdust because it was swept up off the floor. That could disrupt our... Oh well. By the way, I hope you guys don't feel like we're waffling too much in these videos. I think it's really important that we get the right information across in these videos. I don't watch Grand Designs. Well, I don't normally, but the last 2 episodes, Tom or someone else has recommended I watch, and I've watched them. I didn't learn much at all. I learned how much it costs and how they kind of did it. Didn't tell me how the place was heated. It didn't tell me what insulation was in the wall. It was really vague. And if it did mention anything, it was for a fleeting moment. There was real lack of detail. So I'm kind of trying to be the polar opposite of that. Of course, that might mean that sometimes there's too much detail, or it's not quite as action-packed as it used to be. But, you know, one day we'll get inside and we'll be doing plastering and tiling, and there'll be more of that. That doesn't need explaining, it just needs doing. But for now, there's a lot that goes into this that I think is worth sharing. Oh, it doesn't feel like there's much gas in here. Let me sort that out before bonfire night. Right, I haven't tried this, so this could be an embarrassment if this all suddenly sets fire, but it might all just blow away as well. Now, we're not densely packing it in, but that's one of the benefits of having it dense, is there's not air in there. So things like fire breaks and spread of fire, all the tests for this, blown in at the density that we've got, it doesn't, the fire spreading is not really an issue because it just chars in a wall. There's no big air voids like you might have if you had a wool type insulation. There's quite a lot of sawdust in there off the floor, which might not be on our side, but let's see what happens. Now remember, this is newspaper. A little bit of burning, that might be sawdust. Let's just absolutely gun it and see what happens. But look, it's windy. This should catch, shouldn't it, if it's newspaper? Let's get it right in there. That's pretty reassuring. Because, I mean, I'm not going to use it for bonfire night, put it that way. That's a lot of heat in there. And wind. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Nothing. So, charring is what it said on the fire risk. I'd say that that's all that is. It's just charring, isn't it? It's literally like a wood fibre board. Blow that away, underneath, nothing. I think I've seen a test somewhere where you put a £5 note underneath it and you know that it's going to be safe at the end of the test. I don't know what more I can show you, but like, this is high heat and wind And it's bone dry. I mean, that is literally as dry as insulation gets. And it's gone. And interestingly, I did speak to someone, I can't remember who the owner was of the house, but they had this stuff and an intermediate floor, so first floor between the joists, and they had a kitchen fire. And that kitchen fire led the ceiling to fail and the plasterboard collapsed. And 300 millimeters, the size of the whole room of this stuff, fell, and it just suffocated out the flames, and it literally put the fire out. So that's something you wouldn't expect. Shredded newspaper putting out a house fire. But I guess if there's no air in the wall, which there is very little air left because it's just jam-packed full of this stuff, then there's no room for a chimney effect, and therefore that happens. There's nothing left. I don't want to sound cocky because I don't want a house fire in the future, and I don't want all your cheeky comments. But to me, bearing in mind I've never even done that experiment before, I was kind of hoping it didn't fail. To me, that's quite reassuring. And I mean, I could get a bit of Kingspan now. Or should we not go down that route? Setting fire to things. Look, at the end of the day, we're in a timber frame building, but even if you weren't, most house fires, it's the stuff inside that you want to worry about. It's the sofas and the carpet and the blooming plastic Tupperware melting in your cupboard, or all the fumes that come off that. By the time that insulation burning at whatever rate it should do or shouldn't do is an issue, I don't want anyone to be in the house. And the house is gone at that point. So whatever you've got on your wall, it shouldn't really be. But by the time it's becoming an issue with the insulation burning, I think it's game over anyway. So the idea is not to let your house burn. But if it does burn, that's not the problem. It's other things. All right, we're done. I've had a bit of fun there. That was quite exciting. And I'm especially glad that it didn't just combust in my face. So we talked about the cost. It's pretty neutral, and I've not had to do much of it myself. It's all been blown in. We've talked about the properties of it. Hopefully the pest issue isn't an issue. Fire retardants is okay, and also damp and slumping in the walls. Well, it's not going to slump dry, put it that way. And if it gets wet, it gets wet, and that's not to do with the insulation, that's to do with an external issue or an internal issue. We have a much better performing acoustic insulation than most because it's just a solid mass. So if you were by a road or a railway or something like that, I think it's a good option. Those of you who've already supported us by heading over to the website and doing the charity fundraiser for this year, it's the shoebox appeal. The girls have been busy, that's why the shoebox is everywhere here. A whole bunch of you from the last video went over and did that. I'll give you an update in the next video on how many they've put together. But it's all going well, and I'm trying to stay out of it because I've got enough on my plate. Brickwork, we think we might be able to crack it this week. We're certainly going to get everything finished apart from our 2 feature panels at the front. Loads of suggestions came in for that. That's the 2 brick sections that are going to be either side of our front door. We've moved away from fancy herringbone or anything too distracting there, but I think we still want to do something different. So potentially just a recessed section, which could look quite nice, especially if there was a bit of lighting or something. But either way, it'd be nice to get those done. Cladding is pretty much in the pipeline now, so that is our November project, getting all the cladding done up, and then we can get back in here, because as soon as we start hanging plasterboard, it's going to make me really happy. It's going to look different. We've also got MVHR. So that is a big hot topic for December. It's going to be MVHR month. So as we start planning those videos, if you've got questions, recommendations, anything like that, let us know. We are already fixed up with what we're using as far as the plant and the supplier and some of the ducting, but there's going to be some challenges because we're probably a little bit late on the design side of it. We should have factored in a few more things when we designed our steels to allow our big ducts to get through. We're trying to avoid using flexi ducts. It's going to be, proper rigid ducting. So there might be a few areas we're going to have to box in, but most of it we've got good access. But that's a whole other thing to teach myself about. Finally, I can't go without saying another big thank you to James. Really professional outfit, and although he was one-man band this week and I was the chief topper-upper, everything worked really well. He understands buildings, which helps. He's built timber frames, so he knows what's what. There are only a small handful of people who are certified to install this, and like I was saying earlier, you can't just hire or rent or buy or machine and buy the insulation. You have to be accredited, which is good because it means that it's only being installed properly and there's no big fails because people have given it a bad name by putting it in incorrectly, but there's less people to go to. We got 3 or 4 different quotes. James was great at getting back to us and gave us also some tips. We were still building the house at the time, so we got a load of info. And what that means is that he was able to just explain about the noggins and what's the best way to go about getting the insulation in easier, but also making sure there's less cold bridging. And then James, together with Warm Cell, who supplied the insulation, we were able to make sure that the wall was up to standards for all sorts of different things, whether it's fire, structural, or just thermal breaks, and making sure everything was nice and toasty and continuous airtight barriers and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all for watching. Remember, if you can, do it yourself, and we'll see you next time.